We're on, Leslie.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning,
Good
Leslie.
morning, world. We are this morning looking at Genesis 15 and hopefully 16 as well. And so, Laura, what would you like to do? Would you like to pray, or would you like to read, or would you like to do a bit of both?
I can pray, and if you need help with the reading, I can help you.
Well, if you pray and then we'll share the reading. I'll do the first. There are 21 verses, so if I go up to something like 11, and then let you do the rest.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, Heavenly Father. I thank you for this opportunity to look at your word together, to learn more about you and hear what you have to say to us through your word, and to learn a bit more about the history of what lies behind us and what prophesies what's to come, Father. Amen.
Amen. So, Genesis 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, your very great reward. This is before Abram has become Abraham, and it's quite a stumble to say it. But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "You've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him. "This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it." But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, how can I know that I shall gain possession of it?" So the Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away.
As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of Kenites and Kenizzites and Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites and the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites and the Jebusites."
Very good. They weren't too tricky, were they, those
They weren't
words?
too bad.
We've had words. Nigel had a whole load of difficult ones in the previous chapters. So I've always been quite moved by this chapter, by this episode with Abram. It's very much him. It's like we're looking in on a very personal, intimate session that Abram's having with God. And there's a depth to it, and so it's a great passage. I suppose one of the things that I've spotted this morning was that it says that he was put into a deep sleep. And in verse 12, as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep. So he'd arranged all these creatures, fell into a deep sleep. But then in verse 17, when the sun had set, there was this smoking brazier went through. So presumably, if he's been in a deep sleep, still there will be the evidence when he wakes up of God going through. Because, I was thinking, if he's asleep, how's he going to know that God has spoken with him? And so that was something I've noticed this morning. Anyway, Laura, opened up for you to share anything that comes to you or not.
I think, like you said, it's something that we've heard about so many times about the covenant between God and Abraham, but I hadn't. When I read through it and when you mentioned it, the intimacy of that moment. If you think about times when God speaks to you and promises things to you, they're quite precious moments, aren't they? They're not just something you flippantly put into conversation with people. They're like precious moments where God's given you a promise, and it's not just a small promise, is it, that he's given him? It's stuff that humanly we wouldn't be able to comprehend. We wouldn't be able to see that far ahead, because God's like outside of time. So for him to say all these things are going to happen at this time, at this time, and this time, but for us as humans, it's hard to think about what's going to happen in 400 years, because we're so focused on our present time of what we're going through, whether it's good or bad. That's where our minds tend to be and our hearts tend to be, not necessarily looking forward, which we should be doing. Like when we sing songs about blessings our children's children's children and that kind of thing, we should be praying for the generations to come. But actually, I don't know if that makes sense, but it is hard for us to comprehend that things will be different in 400 years, even though we've got history to show how different things are 400 years ago. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. It just reminded me of what's the book? I had it in my head. Gonna have to look at my index here. Ecclesiastes, where it says he's put eternity in the hearts of man.
Yeah.
And I think Abraham must have been, obviously he was very special in his approach to God and in his the spiritual side of his life, and as a character. And even though, as we've seen in previous sessions over these weeks, he did have his failures. He did have his moments when he didn't do the right thing. But on the whole, he must have had a heart for God and must have been very earnest that God knew him this well, that he could entrust him with this and give him such a lovely prophetic outlook, that he would live to an old age, for instance, where one or two of the other characters in the Old Testament came actually to an earlier sticky end, didn't they?
Yeah.
Or an earlier end anyway, even if it wasn't a sticky one. So there must have been quite the character that God would use him for this, an Abraham character. Yeah.
And I think I also love the fact that it's a two-way conversation. At the beginning, Abraham's asking, well, what are you going to give me? I'm childless, and who's my heir going to be? And God responds to him. And I think sometimes we can be fearful of asking God questions because we don't want to sound like we're doubting him, but actually we can ask him questions because he knows everything and he loves us, and sometimes he'll give us the answer and sometimes he won't, because he wants us to trust him and see what's to come. But for me, the way God's responded is like a loving father, that I've promised you these things. It's going to happen. It just isn't happening right now, and um, I just think that's so good that we're able to have a two-way conversation with God, and we don't have to. We do have to be obedient and trust God, but in that we can ask him questions when we don't understand, or we're unsure about how things are going to happen, or if we know God's given us a promise but we don't see it happening. It doesn't take that promise away because we've asked a question about it.
No, that's right. This excuse me, this servant Eliezer of Damascus, in those days you could like adopt a servant within your household as a family member. So it seems he's obviously given this a little bit of thought, because he says to God here at the beginning, "You've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." And he's named Eliezer of Damascus, but God reassures him that that's not going to be the case, that he is going to have a child. But as we will discover in the next chapter, we take things into our own hands at times. If we don't get a quick answer, we try and work it out, and we find a solution ourselves to something, and that's something we have to be very, very wary of doing. And let me sit on my hands until the promise of God actually comes through, because it's much better when he does it, and we need to learn to trust. So that was an interesting thing with this servant who, I don't think he has been adopted, but that possibility was there.
Yeah, I think that's. Sorry, carry on.
No, you go.
I was going to say, sometimes we have a lack of patience, don't we, and a lack of trust, and this is the obvious answer. It's right in front of me. I'll just do that. That's the easy, obvious answer. But as you say, our answer is not going to be the best answer. Whatever God's got in store is going to be the best plan for us.
That's always the case, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually something that we can rest in and have peace in, rather than twisting around trying to work out how something is going to happen when it seems impossible. If we just sort of relax back and give it to God, not be lazy, but actually it's an activity, isn't it? It's an activity to give it to God and then wait, because waiting is an activity. It's not a not doing anything.
Yeah.
No, it's I've had things even recently where I've had to do that, not take matters into my own hands, but trust that God will bring things about. We have to do it all the time, I'm sure. So what do we think about these creatures? Bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. How do you fancy that, Laura?
It's not my kind of dinner.
Presumably they were brought alive to him and he had to deal with them.
I would have thought so.
He had to kill them, cut them, and arrange them. And then he had to drive the birds of prey away that came down on the carcasses, which to me speaks of the enemy attack coming down on what we are presenting to God as an offering. We then can get challenged by things coming into our mind or coming into life that would challenge what we're doing.
Yeah, I think getting those animals together wouldn't have necessarily been an easy job, I don't think. Neither would getting rid of the birds of prey. That if they're determined to get what they want, they're gonna keep coming back, aren't they? And like you say, if the enemy's attacking, he doesn't just do a little bit. He keeps chipping away, doesn't he, until he feels like he's going to win. But I thought it was interesting that he didn't cut the birds in half. I don't know why that stood out to me. He cut everything else up, but not the birds. I don't know.
I think perhaps they were too small.
Maybe.
I think that's the only possible reason that's offered in the commentaries.
Yeah.
Unless you've spotted something else.
No, I haven't spotted something else. It just stood out to me that was a point that was made in the passage, and I just was interesting.
There's a note in Leviticus, a cross-reference, Leviticus 1:17. I can just have a quick look at that. He shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it before the Lord 7 times in front of the curtain. Now it just talks about I'm not sure why that's. Oh no, that's not wrong, is it? I'm looking at the wrong chapter, which is why it doesn't fit what it says. What did I say it was? 1 Leviticus 17. He shall tear it open by the wings, not severing it completely, and then the priest shall burn it on the wood that's on the fire. So there are different ways of dealing with offerings. If the offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, he's to offer a dove and a young pigeon. The priest shall bring it to the altar, wring off the head, and burn it on the altar. Various things he had to do with it. So difficult one. I'm just glad we don't have to do that now.
Yes.
No need for those things. But as you say, he did have to find them and bring them. He had to catch a dove and a pigeon. Don't know how they would have done that.
No. I just wonder if obviously do things like that more often than we do, and I guess we have nets and all sorts of stuff that we catch things with, don't we now? I don't know what they would have used then.
I have been in Norfolk with our grandchildren, and we went to an event where we were ringing birds. That's not ringing as in twisting necks, but putting rings on their, taking a census and weighing them and doing all that sort of stuff. And they had a net that they put over the bushes, and the birds would get caught in there. And it was a very, very lovely event. So I've got photographs of my little granddaughter with little birds sitting on her hand. It was really lovely. Very sweet. So I don't know if there's any more we want to look at here.
Just having a look through.
You will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. It's a nice thing to know, isn't it?
It is.
In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here. For the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. I mean, that's a curious statement, isn't it?
It is. I think all of that it sounds like the kind of thing you should hear, and then, like you say, give everything to God, let him do what he's going to do, because God's made this promise about living to an old age and going back to my fathers and being at peace and all of these things. And like you say, we'll find out soon that Abraham still wants to try to do things his own way.
Yeah. The note, the fourth generation, in the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And the note on that is that that is after 400 years, a generation was the age of a man when his first son was born. In Abraham's case, he was 100 when his first son was born. And the sin of the Amorites, just how sinful many Canaanite religious practices were, is now known from the archaeological artifacts and from their own epic literature that's been discovered with long words. Their worship was polytheistic and included child sacrifice, idolatry, religious prostitution, and divination. So God was patient in judgment, even with the wicked Canaanites. God often appears in the Old Testament as being patient with certain times of sin, like with Jonah, who got sent to take a message to the very sinful group of people, and out of his message they repented, rather than God doesn't just annihilate groups of people because they're doing the wrong thing. He often seems to have long patience and waits and deals with things at the right time.
Yeah.
Whereas I would probably just, let's get rid of that lot. Let's deal with them. Don't like them, so we'll rub them out.
Yeah. I've given them a chance. They're not listening.
I think it's a good thing I'm probably not God or his assistant. So when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, this smoking brazier with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. And on that day, God makes a covenant with Abram. And so I guess from the start of this chapter, where he's saying, how will I know that you're going to do these things? How will I know that your promise is true? God puts it into a very solemn covenant with him, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. And I think, like you said earlier, the what was it, the smoking pot, what it says on here, smoking fire pot and flaming torch, it was a sign of God's presence having been there with him.
Yes. Yes. In ancient times, the parties solemnized a covenant by walking down an aisle flanked by the pieces of slaughtered animals. And apparently that's something in Jeremiah. And the practice signified a self-maledictory oath. May it be so done to me if I do not keep my oath and pledge. Having credited Abraham's faith as righteousness, God now graciously ministered to his need for assurance concerning the land. And he granted Abram a promissory covenant as he had done to Noah. So in effect, I suppose we're seeing here that God's oath to Abraham is a bit like the in ancient times when the parties solemnized a covenant by walking down the aisle and saying, may it be to me if I don't keep my oath and pledge. This is coming from God, isn't it? It's not Abram that's that's making that oath. It's actually God is making it to Abraham, which is amazing.
Yeah,
so should we? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I was looking at the ESV notes earlier, and it says similar. It says the ritual described here is possibly a type of oath that involves a self-curse if not fulfilled. God will become like the dead animals if he does not keep his word. Another interpretation is the ritual is an acted sign in which the sacrificial animals symbolize Abraham's descendants and signify that the birds of prey signify their enemies, unclean nations, and the fire pot and torch represent God's presence.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What would we do without our notes, say? Oh, there's Mr. Illingworth joining us. Good morning, David.
Good morning, David.
Nice to see you.
I just
You're
thought
just in time, actually.
I'd better pop in just to make sure you're behaving yourself.
Yeah, we're just about to move on to chapter 16, actually, I think, Laura. Do you think that's
I think so.
A good move?
Definitely.
We've got 16 verses, David. Would you like to read them all, or would you like to share it with?
I don't mind. I just need to get there first.
Okay.
Hang on. Let's get my brain out of the bank. Right. Good. This is Hagar and Ishmael, yeah?
That's one, yeah. So we've just been seeing God's covenant with Abram, and we've just been witnessing a very intimate moment of him with God and God reassuring him of what he has promised by covenant. So now, and he's reassured him that his descendant will be from his own body, and it won't be, as Abram is suggesting, from an adopted member of his household. So now we go into 16, where we see something different happening.
Okay. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abraham, I'm in for that, he says. No. And Abraham heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband, Abraham, to give to her husband Abraham to be his wife. After Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abraham, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abraham said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand." Then the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. For she said, have I also seen, have I also here seen him who sees me? Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Wow.
I have to smile because we've just dealt with Abram thinking that his servant is going to be his heir. And now we've got Sarai, his wife, also bringing her the servant into the equation. You know, finding their own solution to something that actually God has got a plan for. And you know, we see the mess, and we still see the mess that it's caused, doing our own thing. So they were never meant to have a child by the bond servant, either the male within the household or by Sarah's Egyptian maidservant Hagar. So throwing it out to you, Laura, David.
Gosh, 86 years old.
Yes.
And
his strength
I wouldn't like to start again at this age, let alone 86. And that's not the end of it, is it?
No, it's his first.
That's his first. So, gosh, his vigor was not diminished. I think the phrase goes with Moses. No. But in those days, they lived a lot longer, didn't they? I mean, Abraham, I can't remember how long he lived. I've got his.
Yes, 86 was probably not what it is now for us. Anyway, should we stick with our raising of hands again, so that I don't want to, because Laura's got things to say as well. I'm sure I can see something's ticking there.
Yeah.
While you're looking, David, let's hear from Laura.
Oh, I'm not ready yet.
Oh, okay.
Abraham lived 175 years. So he's only mid-term.
Middle-aged then.
Yeah.
Middle-aged.
Yeah.
It's
and
interesting.
The problems that this brought, that the maid servant then becomes loftier, what's the word, cocky, with her mistress because she is pregnant and Sarah's not pregnant. You know, the problems it brings when you don't stay with really the best prescription for family life. We see it now, don't we? The families that struggle because they're not as they are designed to be. And here we see it, that Hagar is, Sarah ill-treats her. It's just not a happy household.
Well, it's having two wives, that's a problem.
Well, she wasn't a wife, though, was she?
She was. She gave her to him as a wife.
Oh, was she actually?
Yeah.
To be his wife? Yes, she does. Yeah, he does. Would you like to share Hammond with another, Laura?
They can have him. No, I'm joking. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
It's a recipe for disaster, I would think.
And there's a reference here to in Samuel, Peninnah acted similarly towards Hannah when she Hannah hadn't had were they both wives? I think they were, weren't they? 1 Samuel 1:6.
I'm just reading a commentary here, and it says this means Abraham was 85 at the time. At this time, that would make Sarai about 76. The scripture doesn't give Hagar's age. She was possibly one of the slaves Pharaoh had given to Abraham over the incident where Pharaoh nearly took Sarai to be his wife. This is prior to God healing Abraham and or Sarai, so they could have children. So this is quite a testimony to Abraham's physical state to still be able to have children at the age of 85.
Mm.
It's a sad story, really, isn't it? But
well, it's Abraham took Lot when he was told to live, and I know that Nigel sees it as how they were with their families then, that Lot was the nephew, he'd lost his dad, and so he was taken on. But God had said, leave everything and go. And he took Lot, and that caused problems. And now here we see them again taking matters into their own hands, not quite doing what God has said to do, which we end up with a problem. And I guess it's the same for all of us. We're all capable of not quite waiting for God's provision. Not, we think, oh, well, I'll just do this and that might work. And then we can end up with, I'm not saying that we should sit and do nothing. That's not it. But we need to be sure that we're hearing from God on matters that are really important, don't we?
Definitely. And I think there is a desire, it comes from the beginning, doesn't it? There's a desire in us to create, because as in have children, that was the commandment, wasn't it, to go and multiply, and that in one way. And I think for when it's difficult to have children, or it seems impossible to have children, that can be quite a painful thing to carry, or a burden to carry. And in a time where there's such an importance on having an heir to take on whatever belongs to the family, to have something, and then God's made promises to you, to have all of that in your heart and in your mind must be quite a weight to carry. And then, like we've seen, to try and do it our own way to make it happen is not the right way to do it. But you can see why there would be the desire and the drive to do it, when I sometimes feel like I don't make any sense whatsoever.
No, it's true. And I just realized as reading this that actually it was Hagar who started the distress between her and Sarai. It wasn't Sarai who got upset with Hagar, but Hagar got upset with with Sarai, because Sarai couldn't conceive. And I just thinking that sometimes people despise others who can't do what they can do, if you see what I mean. So Hagar's got a bit got upset with Sarai, and that was why she actually fled in the end, because Sarai sort of said to Abraham, "What are you going to do about it, mate?"
Yes, it's verse 5. She says to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. It's your fault. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me.
Yeah.
May the Lord judge between you and me. So she's really saying to Abram, you need to do something.
Yeah.
This isn't good. And poor old Abraham then had to, Sarah ill-treated her so that the woman fled, which wasn't right either. It's all just a mess, really, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah. It's trying, as you said earlier, it's trying to sort out the Lord's will in your own way. I mean, he'd given a clear covenant there to your descendants. I will have given this land from the, and it's sometimes very difficult to have patience, isn't it? To wait. And I can remember God saying to me, wait, once when it was very, when our bank balance was getting very low, and I didn't know what he wanted us to do. He said, wait, and then eventually it came good. But perhaps Abraham, if he'd have been a bit more strong in character, he'd have said to Sarai, no, I'm not going to go into Hagar. That would be wrong. But I don't know, in those days they had more.
Mind you could say that about Adam as well. No, I'm not going to eat the fruit because God has said.
That's right.
So right the way down, it's been the chap really that hasn't done it properly.
No, it's been the chap who's taken notice of his wife.
Wow.
But then if we look back to Abraham and Sarai going into Egypt, that's not.
Yeah.
That was him as well. Lie so that I don't get killed. You know, it's the chap taking an initiative that is not a godly one, whether it's listening to his wife at the wrong moment and not helping his wife to see, actually, that's not what God has said, darling. Let's do it this way. This is what God has said. I mean, you don't have to be bossy about it as a man. You can bring your wife in on the conversation you've had with God, and stay on the right track. And that's a great thing. That's good leadership, isn't it? But just going by what your wife has said, and then perhaps blaming her further down the road, it was that woman that you gave me. which is what is written in scripture. Oh, I'm enjoying myself this morning.
I feel outnumbered.
But I do have to think that Sarah didn't have to go to Pharaoh, did she? To Pharaoh when I've missed some.
She did.
No, you mean
Potiphar? Was it Potiphar?
When Abraham, I've lost track of my story now. But when Abraham told her to go and pretend to be his sister instead of being his wife, she didn't have to do that either. So it does work both ways.
Yeah.
I don't know that she didn't have to. In that culture, maybe she did. Maybe if she hadn't, there would have been a suspicion, wouldn't there? You know, working within how they did things then. The diplomacy of it.
I mean, Sarai was Abraham's half sister.
Yeah. But to pretend that she wasn't his wife.
Yeah.
Is the bit that
no, but I'm just thinking about the situation at the beginning of chapter 16, where Sarai is a half sister of Abraham, and she may think, well, because of that, there's a problem here, and maybe we should have some fresh blood in our midst. So she got, and whenever they bring the Egyptians in, there's always problems, isn't there?
Yeah, I was thinking of something. Do we think that if we wait patiently, I have to tell you, we've got a box on the side of our garage and we've got blue tits nesting in it. and they're still, I think one of the babies has just poked its head out. David, can you see that from where you are? And
Yeah.
it's the sweetest thing. I see the parents going in and out, but I think the babies are almost ready to fledge now. And they put their heads out through the hole, and they've got the yellow lips that the parent can see clearly.
Does this have a learning point to this?
This is nothing to do with this, but it is just such a lovely.
Are we online, Laura?
We are.
It is a God thing, isn't it? That that He's created all of this, so it's not completely out of the subject. But yes, do we think that when God tells us to do something, that it will always then go smoothly? Can we expect that as a learning tip from this? Or do we think that even the fact that Hagar had this child and God said that he will be a great nation, he'll be a wild donkey of a man, and he'll live in hostility towards his brothers, did God want that to happen? And does that happen in our lives, that we sometimes have trauma, even though God has kind of allowed something? I don't know, maybe that's not a good question.
I think if God promises something, it will happen, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to be a smooth path, because as we can see here, we have our own free will, and sometimes we make mistakes on the way through in thinking we know how to get that promise to happen, rather than allowing God to do his thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because Hagar runs away, but the God sends her back, and then she bears Abraham Ishmael when she's back with him. So maybe Abraham at this stage thinks that Ishmael is God's provision, because it's another 15 years before Abraham actually gets Isaac.
Sorry, I just had to take a photograph. It's amazing watching them. Yes, sorry. Yes. So,
I mean, if God's promised you something, and you actually do take it in your own way, and you see what you think is the fulfillment of God's promise, and especially, I mean, it says at the beginning of chapter 17, when Abraham was 99 years old. There's a long time between. I mean, Ishmael is sort of 19 years old or 20 years old, something like that, when the next comes along. And Sarah is 90 years old. So
it says 13 years had passed since Ishmael's birth. That's in 17.
Yeah.
So Abram's 99.
Right.
And he's 13.
Yeah.
So Hagar's gone back to the homestead and had her baby, and Ishmael is brought up as one of Abraham's family. So it all comes good in that sense. We had a lot of teaching on this particular passage in our early days of being Christians, of you've got the bondwoman and you've got the free woman, Sarah being the free woman and Hagar being the bondwoman. And can you remember stuff from back then, David? It's a long time ago, isn't it?
I mean, Isaac isn't born until chapter 21, so there's quite a long time until that happens. Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. I'd have to have a think about that. But it is Hagar is the bondwoman, but she. I mean, it just depends what this means by Abraham to be his wife. Does that mean she comes out of bondage? If she's a wife, is she no longer a slave?
It's a very good question.
Well, it's a good question. We don't know what the culture was there, do we? We've got 5 minutes left.
Well, we'll have to leave that in the air and answer it tomorrow when. Who's in charge tomorrow? Me. Oh gosh, I'll have to find the answer.
You better find out. You've got 24 hours.
Right.
Quite some, well, a bit less.
No, it's. I mean, to me, it just it shows. If we sort of transpose it into our own lives, it's just a matter of actually being close to God, so that we actually hear His voice and we listen to that voice, and we try not to sort of bend what His instructions are to suit our own feelings. And Sarai was probably feeling guilty that she can't bear children, and I suppose she doesn't know whether it's Abraham or herself that's the culprit. So she probably says, "Here, try Hagar and see if it works with her, so we can find out whose whose fault it was." But I mean, in the end, I mean, God creates the situation out of difficulty, where actually His promise is fulfilled. So even when we see things happening that actually look as if everything's going to pot, so long as we've got that clear word from God. And I'm just thinking about a friend of ours who was sort of diagnosed with terminal cancer, and God gave him a word that actually, no, he's not going to die. He's got more to do, and actually went through about a year of various treatments, but he's up and running, clear of the cancer now. And I think when you've got a clear word from God about something, you've just got to hang on to that word and let it work through your circumstances, even when it looks hopeless, or when other people especially are telling you it's hopeless. You've just got to keep with the word that God's actually given you, and otherwise you get into all sorts of problems. That's what it says to me, anyhow.
I think this whole birth thing and children, we've got 2 children. God didn't say have children. We just took it upon ourselves to go for a family, and we've ended up with 2, and they're different characters and different problems on different sides. You know, I'm not quite sure what I'm saying, but I'm thinking it's part of our humanity, isn't it, that we do procreate, as God said, as you mentioned earlier. I've forgotten your name.
David.
It's on the screen. It's on the screen, Leslie.
It says David.
He said at the beginning.
I've been married to you for nearly half a century, and David.
Yes, fill the earth with children. So it's a natural thing. But is it a natural thing to give your spouse to another in order to? That's where the family issues come. And of course, having children, you've got 2 boys, Laura. One doesn't know what's ahead with their choices and their families. We just have to keep including God all the time in everything that comes our way, I think, is the answer. And as long as we're purposefully keeping God fully in the picture of what we do, he can guide us. So it's not about not doing anything, it's about doing everything, but with this constant allowing God to overrule or underwrite what we do. Yeah, would you say?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful that we don't say, he gives us desires and he gives us as we talked about, he wants us to procreate, he wants us to be creative, and he wants us to enjoy life and be happy and live life to the fullest. But I think we have to be careful that we don't say, well, this is my plan, God, come and bless it. I think we have to be careful that we go to God and say, this is what I think is going to happen. Talk to me about it, or tell me if this is right. Or go to him for guidance almost before we set the plan in stone. Rather than, so before we put plans into place, we need to not run it past God, but pray about it and check that it's in line with God's heart and what his desire is for us and for our families. And but God doesn't want us just to live a boring life and just sit and wait for everything to happen. He wants us to go out and do stuff. He wants us to enjoy our life and to be everything he created us to be. But we have to just make sure that we are walking in line with him and talking with him and listening to him about where we go, and not just saying, well, I've decided I'm going to move to the other side of the world, God bless this plan. Because if it's not God's plan, it's not gonna work like that. And
no.
so yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So on that note,
good summary, Laura,
of including God in all our plans, but allowing him, the boat in the water can only be guided if it's moving. If it's anchored, it's not going to go anywhere, and God's not going to be able to stop it. So we need to proceed mindfully and prayerfully. And I think on that note, it's just gone past 10 o'clock. So we'll leave it there. David, you are 17 and 18 tomorrow, if you can. Those 2 chapters are all
quite
right
long
to
on
do.
that. We'll see how we get on.
And we'll finish here, Laura. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm great with that. I shall take us off YouTube.
And thank you for being with us, Laura. That's been fun this morning.
That's all right. I can be
We
here.
sorted out the chaps, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
When you're offline, I have something to say.
All right, I'll take us off.